Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of 3 and hopefully 4 speakers to join us today for this webinar on creating demand, examining strategies for accelerating job creation and livelihoods through handmade products and niche products. We're including saffron in this discussion as well. I'm the Managing Director and Director of Economic Growth and Trade at McCommon Company. And McCommon Company has been working in this space for about 7 years in the craft space in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we're so pleased that our panelists were able to join us. We've worked with and for all of them over the years. So glad to have you. I'll just start with introductions. And Tanya, would you like to start? I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good evening for those who are on the other corner of the world. Tanya Ary. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Vija, which is a jewelry line from Afghanistan. I'm also an economist and economic development practitioner, having over 10 years of experience, worked with USAID and its contracts and the World Bank in Afghanistan. My area of work has been economic growth, job creation, export promotion, women's economic empowerment, and research. And it's been 2 years that I founded my own jewelry line, which is, the entire production is in Afghanistan, and we use Afghanistan's natural gemstones to make the jewelry, and currently we are supporting about 17 artisans in the country. It's an online store, and our primary markets are mostly international markets, focusing on the United States, Canada, European countries, and soon Australia. We also have a very good market in Afghanistan. Our designs are very, very modern, with a bit of the heritage that we have, inspired by a centuries-old Afghan art and culture, but in a way that it is wearable today and it meets the demand today. We also have customized jewelry. We make customized jewelry for our customers, and we accept and we work with them through a very consistent process, and until the very end, when our customer gets the jewelry. I'm very, very happy to be here. I am so excited to be listening and learning from my other co-panelists and share what I have from my journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya. Zidan?
Thank you, Victoria. My name is Zidan Muhammad. I'm the Iraq Country Director with Prosperity Catalyst. We're a nonprofit organization that focuses on empowering women economically through giving them access to the market, technical training, and business management training. We've been working in Iraq since 2014. We've been training women, IDPs, vulnerable groups, including youth who've been displaced, and then also those who are not getting an opportunity to get a job. Our main focus is to create a sustainable income to these people through creating a sustainable supply chain for handmade products that we market locally and internationally. And in addition, we try to empower those businesses who are also in the sector of handicraft by giving them the training on how to improve their quality of products, how to have a viable business plan, and how to make sales and how to promote for these sales, and eventually how they can probably connect to the international market as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Zidan. Welcome. And Hedvig.
Yeah. So nice to be here. And I've worked in the handmade sector for maybe close to 15 years, also starting in Afghanistan. So this keeps going off, which is how I met Victoria. And when I came to Canada, where I now live, I started a business called the Farm White Collective that was focusing on initially helping Afghan artisans access the North American market. And then we expanded to other places in the world, such as Africa and Latin America, because all artisans, no matter where they seem to have exactly the same issues: access to markets, access to financing, need to be more digital, need for more design support. That's extremely global trend. And I ran that business for a couple of years, but I always felt there was aspects of this that was really missing. And so now we've rolled that business into a bigger platform called Powered by People, which is really quite focused on technology. It offers 3 core services, and they're all centered around connecting producers in various countries, artisan producers, to buyers in North America, Europe, or parts of Asia. But at the same time, it gives digital tools to manage orders and production, communication. It also gives financing so that there's this ability to bridge the gap and take an order, even if, as many buyers, in particular after COVID, want net 60-day payment terms. Of course, for many artisans, they need to be paid in advance. It's a very complicated issue. So we are trying to bridge that financial gap between the buyer and the vendor, which I do think, looking at a lot of other platforms, is really a very important part of sort of unlocking the markets. So and make sure you remove the friction. And I think that's really what our platform is trying to do. I think we see a huge opportunity for handmade, authentic products. And I think the handmade and artisanal sector has an opportunity to fill this gap, but only if we manage to make it more professional. It needs to be more digital. It needs to be better financed. It needs to be presented in a different way. You need to remove all the friction for the buyer, so it's as easy to buy from an artisan anywhere, or the person the artisan works with, as it is to work with a factory somewhere in China or Taiwan or something like that. And I think that does seem like a very ambitious task, but that is what it's going to take for the handmade sector to make it and to expand and to become more mainstream. And I'm not talking about products looking more mainstream. I think, of course, it's the authentic, heritage aspects of the products that makes them so interesting. But it's the way people are able to buy them that has to be more mainstream and more frictionless. And I think really in the 15 years I've been involved in the sector, that's not at all what we focus on. We always focus on the beauty and the design and the story. And these things are important, but not if the rest doesn't work. And so I think, one of the biggest challenges we are having at the moment is payments. On our platform, a buyer would be able to buy anything on the platform, pay us, and then we would be able to remit payment to the 46 countries that we work with. But even that at the moment is very difficult. There aren't any payment solutions apart from banks, which I think we can all agree are very expensive, that will allow you to do that. So how do we really address the logistics behind sales? And it's, of course, it's a lot more boring than talking about tradition and heritage and beauty. I also much prefer those topics, but I really have gotten a little bit obsessed with the mechanics of how we're actually going to make this work and how we're going to scale it. And so that's what I will probably be talking mostly about.
Thank you, Hedvig. Those are excellent points. I mean, that's why we wanted to host a group of 4 founders, because it takes a business mind to bring these beautiful products and niche products to market. And so focusing on these logistics really are critical. Keith, excellent. You're able to join us. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So we're just doing quick introductions if you'd like to introduce your work and talk a bit about your past work with Rumi Spice as well.
Hey, Victoria and everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I think I'm totally connected now. It's great to hear everybody's introductions. I think you all hit on a lot of topics that are near and dear to my heart, and I totally 100% agree with. As Victoria said, my name is Keith Alanis. I am a co-founder of Rumi Spice. Rumi Spice is a company that we founded in 2014 with a mission to cultivate peace in Afghanistan by providing economic opportunity for marginalized people. We started with importing saffron to the U.S. Back in 2014, 2015 to address a supplier problem of access to markets. There was saffron being grown in various places in Afghanistan, but no ability to access international markets. At best, they could access domestic Afghanistan markets. So we started very early in sort of creating that demand for the U.S. market, not knowing if it'll take off. Started with a e-commerce and selling sort of door to door to restaurants, and today we sell in over 2,000 stores across the country. Now we source not only saffron but cumin, fennel, other spices as well from Afghanistan, and are expanding rapidly now that we have established distribution within the U.S. But very happy to be here and talk about creating demand and that journey for Rumi Spice, and how we overcame some of those obstacles.
Great, thank you so much. So to launch us into this discussion, we are focusing on this concept of demand. We hear a lot in the spaces that we work in about demand-driven economic growth, and there has to be demand for a product before we should deliver the supply. For these discretionary products, we can live without jewelry, we can live without quilts, we can live without saffron, but they're beautiful, interesting products that have the potential to create jobs and improve lives all around the world. How did each of you, I'd like to ask this question to each of you from a founder's perspective, determine if there was demand before investing in your product, or determine that it was worth investing in creating the demand and how it was created? So I think I'll start with Hedvig, if that sounds good.
Yeah, I think, before my current business, I obviously had a couple of other businesses and the time in Afghanistan. So I had seen the opportunity for sales and had been following that for a long time, and really in this business knew there was demand, but knew it had to be served up in a different way. And so how are we going to create a platform that was able to do that? And we have, can we then scale the demand with this kind of offering? That's now what we need to prove, what is the level of demand. And so, you can do a lot of market research and you can speak to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, you have to decide what you think is reasonable amount of proof of your concept, and then you go out and you either strap it and you bootstrap it and you start, or you go out and raise money. And I would say that we did the latter. We raised money, and investment is some indication that you're right, but it's not entirely the indication, because you could be very good at telling a story and you may really believe in that story, but it's still not. But I think it is a second level of confirmation that you're not the only one who thinks that this can work. So there's a number of ways to try to validate your idea, and raising money is one of them. But also really having focus groups and speaking to a lot of people is, of course, the best thing to do. And then start doing the work. I don't think there is too many other ways.
Great, Zidan. Any thoughts on how did Prosperity Catalyst determine there was demand for these products or create that demand?
I think it's really critical to understand that there's no guarantees. One thing that you plan and then you hope for is different from what the reality is. Therefore, we try to make sure that what we are making is acceptable, but by as many buyers as possible. Therefore, we kind of this is kind of really came toward last year, 2 years ago, when we figured out that we will have to have products that are very low in terms of cost input, but with high perceived value, which that means that we will have a line of products that is not necessarily speaking to one vendor or to one retailer, but it's going to be the base or the foundation for something that it might be of an interest to a buyer. And then we can also accommodate to any changes or any modification to that product. The answer again, to your question, is it's a business. If you are looking at this from really a perspective of how this is going to work, you're taking risk. And this is where there's a conflict, or I would see there's always a misunderstanding that things could really go south. And it's not every product you make will be really accepted by the market or have a demand. Then you're taking risk. And this is where nonprofit sector I would say probably has the major challenge, even for us as a nonprofit organization. This is one of the elements that we are running into always when we are developing a new line of products.
That's a really good point about business versus charity. And kind of, I think a lot of the craft space gets viewed as a charity versus a business. So this is really interesting to hear from you guys of how you made it a business. Tanya, demand, how did you create it, or how did you determine it existed for Afghan jewelry? I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. The reason when I started Vija was a combination of the passion I had for this sector, and also as an Afghan woman when I moved to the US. I was always, I was not surprisingly seen as very surprised when I was walking and I was speaking on the panels or meeting people, because I was welcomed with some sort of sympathy, being an Afghan woman, very progressive, and I understand where it came from, because the media, and we do have situations like that in Afghanistan, but we are not always, we're not just that. And I wanted to introduce my country in a very different way, because, and of course in a hidden way, which people not get to know much about. I've been working in the gems and jewelry sector for the last 5 years now. And I didn't start it. Initially I started to work with the businesses, and from USAID's organization, to support them, provide them access to market opportunities, access to finance opportunities, connect them with their international allies. So I had an understanding of there is a demand exists for this sector, at least for the gems of Afghanistan, which are pretty much well known across the country. But so that was giving me a little bit of assurance that if I'm going to found something, there has to be demand for it. And I was not thinking of any nonprofit organization, because for me, the very first question of starting a business is to ensure its sustainability and profitability, so I could move forward and I could expand. And obviously the other objective that we have was to pay back to my country and do something so I could help my other Afghan fellows. And what was a better opportunity to nourish their already skills that they have. And you know, our country is well known for the handmade products, and we have generations of experience when it comes to handmade products, not just jewelry necessarily, but also carpet, embroidery, just to name some of them. So I started because I had the most knowledge and experience in the sector. I started with jewelry, and fortunately, we had a very good start. Our primary market is the US, and we've been. I'm not saying we're where what we are where what we used to be or what we expected to be, but at least it gives us hope that we are on the right direction. And that's what mattered to me the most. We were able to survive one of the very hardest and challenging year, and we still have kept our staff, our artisans back home, and I'm working with them in a way to not just provide them some sort of livelihood, but also work on their skills, so they someday, if they wanted to have their own kind of business, they are able to meet those expectations and those skills that is needed for this business. What differentiates me than what our other businesses in the country, I'm focusing more on, as Hedvig mentioned it, on the infrastructure that was lacking. And fortunately, I am able to provide that, given I have moved to the US and I have better access to opportunities now, including one of them was payment, because it really is a struggle. And that's one of the reasons that our our artisans do not meet our international demand in a sustainable way, because the most needed infrastructure, which is the payment, is not there yet. And also shipping is the other main challenge, because there's a lot of artisans who make very good product, but there's a challenge of how they're gonna send it to the global market. That's another challenge. And I focused, of course, I was we had to like focus on the type of the product, the designs that were sellable in the international market. But in the meantime, build the infrastructure in a way that we not only help our brand, but also support other artisans and other businesses in the country. So just to open a gateway to them as well.
Thank you. Keith, how did you create demand for Afghan saffron?
That's a great question. I enjoyed listening to everybody's answer. You know, the demand and product question is sort of like a chicken and the egg scenario. You know, which one do you do first? Do you focus on the product, or do you focus on creating demand? And really, in my mind, the answer is both. You have to address all of the bottlenecks in the supply. And everybody has, in every sector, there's different but similar bottlenecks. You know, payments, trade financing, quality control. Those are all things that we had to address in saffron and spices. But it does no good to address those without also addressing the demand part of the equation. So it's an iterative process of, you know, creating demand to a certain customer segment, getting feedback from that customer segment, and optimizing your product offering. You know, in the tech world, they would say, you know, focus on product first and demand, focus on building the community and finding out what your community wants and creating that demand, and then build the product. That's easy to do when you're doing a software product and you can churn out something, you know, fairly quickly. But when you have to build an infrastructure in a country like Afghanistan or any other post-conflict country, that takes some time and effort. So it needs to be, you know, forefront of your mind. As an example of Rumi Spice, when we started, our initial customer segment was high-end chefs, and high-end chefs appreciated the quality that the Afghan saffron, you know, naturally had. You know, we could buy high-grade saffron in the market and then sell it to U.S. chefs. But there's, you know, the product is not exactly market ready as it stands in Afghanistan. So there's some modifications we have to do to the processing in order to meet the customer demand, even for the chef customers. But what works for high-end chefs doesn't work for example, retail businesses like Whole Foods. They need to understand that you have a full processing, you know, control of the processing, and you're able to provide food safety and consistency, you know, for a large amount of product, and the same thing with the wholesale sector. So that differing customer demand requires a different type of product or more sophisticated production in your product. But, you know, back to the question of demand, you know, I think that key in creating demand is to, you know, not only have a product that meets that particular target customer segment's, you know, desires and specifications, but to leverage, you know, for example, we leverage the smaller community of chefs to build a e-commerce following, and then we leverage our e-commerce following to build, you know, presence on the retail shelves and pull through on the retail shelves. And, you know, we leverage the story to build our wholesale. So it's all iterative, building on itself and creating that demand. But in my mind, that's the biggest challenge in getting products from Afghanistan, is creating the demand that's going to sustain a for-profit business over time. It's a constant struggle, and it requires constant attention and investment.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we want to get into some of the dynamics in fragile economies, and you've already mentioned a few of these. We've talked about payments a little bit. We've talked about shipping a little bit. Doing business in these fragile economies is even more challenging. You know, in the United States, the small business failure rate is 50%, you know, in the first 5 years. So talk about a mature economy versus an emerging or fragile economy, and think about how difficult it is to get a small business off the ground. Yet all of you have done that with, you know, successfully. Talk a little bit about the payments options. What are some of the solutions that you've found for payments? Because that's been a problem for a long time. You know, just so the audience is aware, you know, processors like Stripe and PayPal that we have here don't operate in Afghanistan and Iraq, for example, because of know your customer rules and the inability of them to verify the end payee. So how have you all found solutions, you know, to these challenges, and what types of methods you're using for payment, shipping, or other logistical challenges for doing business in these economies? Maybe start with Zidan.
Yeah. So just a background of Iraq financial system. It's huge. I would consider it still like a cash-based community. Payments really hard to make electronically. The only exception or the only method that we figure out is the mobile transfer or cash transfer through mobile app. It's still like really in early stages to say like it's a successful method, but this is only to be used internally. Like if we wanted to pay like a beneficiary, that's one way we do it. However, for an outsider or for someone to pay in Iraq for a product or to purchase a material from outside of Iraq, there is like a lot to be done in that area, and we try to work around it, but unfortunately it's still like very early stages to say like it is gonna be improving. The only mechanism is to make sure that the payments goes to the right person, and having like multiple checks and balances, having the right staff, having the right people who are delivering the cash to the beneficiaries.
Hedvig, you also mentioned the payments issue in your remarks earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about what you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, we're using different payment systems depending on what region, because as you're saying, Stripe works for North America plus Mexico. TransferWise works for North America, Europe, and then a few other places. PayPal works for a little bit more, but still not. And then, of course, banks work everywhere. They really do have a hold on the world in that way, and with their very high fees. And so, of course, if you are, I think there's a lot of solutions for consumer-based products, also in the financial space. For example, you'll find a number of apps and soft wallets that can help refugees move monies across border as they transit themselves, but it's very small amounts. And so when you're talking about enterprise level transactions, it's a whole different game. And I find that's where there's a lack of technology and solutions is on the enterprise level of moving higher, larger amounts of money. So for us at the moment, we offer to the, depending on where the producer, artisan producer is, we offer the payments system that is possible in that place, which may in some cases be the bank. And in that case, we recommend that the minimum order is higher so that the total percentage of transaction of the order doesn't become too high. You know, I mean, a $45 banking payment, if you have a $300 order, is obviously not very useful. So there is some ways, if you, for example, if you can set up TransferWise, I think they now call it Wise, and you can, if you can set up a routing number, even if you don't have a US bank account, you can actually move money, but you still ultimately have to put the money down to your bank account. But then you can create a soft wallet where you can maybe group orders. So if you've had a couple of orders within a month, you can then draw all these orders down one time to your bank and decrease the fees. So there are ways around some of this, but obviously for Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, these things are very hard. So I have to say I am a little bit, you know, I've been part of the economic development system, and I have been disappointed in it in many ways, but I think, I mean, also been a lot of great work done. So, but I do think for all the talk we have about development and we still can't move money to people, I do think like that is the basis is to move money. And it's not easy, obviously, with drug trades and proxy wars. And, you know, we understand why KYC, AML and all this is difficult to do, but you know, we have to put a bit more effort behind it. I think we should try to encourage policymakers to actually solve these problems, because they are the basis for including the people we want to include, all of us, into the global trading system. It's just it's the admission. And so if that doesn't even work, then how hard is it for the rest of us to build businesses across border? So I would say that that's something that we should push more with our governments and with our development colleagues.
That's an excellent point. Payments have been an issue since I got involved in this space in 2013, and it's not been resolved. We had a question from one of our participants asking about managing risk. And so if we are, let's maybe just talk about that for a minute, you know, transferring money into these countries without having really strong controls in the banking systems does present risk. How have we come up with ways to mitigate that or address it, to think about it? What type of systems are in place in your businesses to address those questions? Maybe start with Keith.
Yeah, that's a great question, and 100% to what Hedvig was saying about the need for a trade financing solution. I found that there are allegedly, I guess I haven't procured any of these funds, but like ability to get like large amounts of money if you're talking millions and millions of dollars to do big grand slam projects. But the real missing piece of that puzzle is like the SMB businesses that drive growth everywhere in the world, and there's no solution for people who need a couple $100,000 to $1 million. For Rumi Spice, we're putting in anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million annually into the economy, and because there is no trade financing solution, we're at a relative disadvantage to our competitors, which forces us to sort of focus on this high-end premium market. But we're at a disadvantage to our competitors who are able to source spices from all across the world and don't have to pay for the spices until 30 days after it lands in their warehouse in many cases. That's just not possible in a place like Afghanistan. The farmers that we work with, they do not have liquidity to fund a ever increasing demand. So they need cash from before the harvest starts to fund labor to start producing their products, and our processors need cash to pay the laborers, et cetera. So we're paying sometimes 3 to 6 months in advance of harvest or advance of receiving product, which puts us at a disadvantage. That's money that we could be using for advertising and creating demand, but instead it's tied up in inventory for 6 months. And because of that, we've had to create this vertically integrated solution of Rumi Spice where we go all the way down to the farm and farmer. But to get to the question of risk, because we are vertically integrated, we essentially own that product. You could say, for all practical purposes, before it even comes out of the ground, we've already paid for it. But managing risk in Afghanistan is no different from managing risk in any other type of business in any other place in the world. We just happen to maybe think that it all happens by magic if you're working with vendors here in the U.S., but it does not. You need tight cost controls. That's an important part of business anywhere. And we have cost controls. We're asking for the right documentation to verify receipt of payment. We're asking for, we're doing market research and in the market in Afghanistan to make sure that what we're paying for saffron is, in line with what the market is offering. And so all those same rules of cost controls and accounting practices are important. It's something that I think that is developing as a skill set in Afghanistan for, local, skilled labor to be able to do those cost controls on their own. And that's very helpful, but it's something that we always have to improve and always have to, work hard to maintain a tight control over where our money is going. It's definitely not, and this, when I talk to anybody from like grant officers to investors, it's definitely not like fire and forget. Like here's a couple $100,000, like get us some saffron. Not at all. We have very tight controls the whole process and understanding where that money is going at all times and reflecting that on our balance sheet. That's a requirement. And just on, I think that some people have mentioned investment. That's another benefit of having investors and having a for-profit business, is because that drives that discipline in financial accounting. That also helps mitigate risk. That if you bootstrap it, it's hard to hold yourself accountable to that level without having to report quarterly or monthly financials to investors.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Tanya and Zidan, I want to go over to you guys. Can you talk a little bit? We've talked about kind of the cost of goods, the cost of labor, the cost of money. There's lots of costs involved in this space. And how have you all designed your businesses to compete with cheaper goods? A lot of products that are in the US market are all from China, from India, that are in the craft space, considered handmade, even though they probably are more manufactured. How have you found ways to compete and position your products in light of that competition?
Zidan, do you want to go first?
Tanya, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. That's a very, very, very interesting question. And to be honest with you, we're still trying to figure it out because we're a very new company, and US is a very big market. But I think for us, what has worked so far is to be our own brand and have our own sort of identity as a company. And what I mean by that is I focus more on the authenticity and the quality of my product, which and let that speak for itself, because I do understand there's a lot of products, competing products from India, from China, but the designs of the products and these are very, very different, and we have our own customers for that. That's my way of promoting our products, that the heritage and the culture that we are trying to show through our products, and the value that we are creating back home, because it's also today is also about customers are very conscious on the money they pay for buying products. They want to be part of the good cause, and one of our ways to kind of win the customer's heart is, of course, we are ensuring the quality of products, which is no question, and that comes the very first thing. But the other thing that I do to be compatible, or to give my customers a reason to buy my product, is I'm sharing percentage of my profit to support education in Afghanistan, both for women and kids. Obviously, from the development background that I have, it has been part of me. But what better approach could I have to do it sustainably? Because if I am profitable, I will make sure that these good causes that we're supporting in terms of educating the future generation of Afghanistan and women. These are and to be honest with you, we have received very warm welcome in doing this from our customers, and that gives me hope. But obviously, this will only work if my product is in a level that would compete, or it's higher than what is available in the market. And studying the US market, our prices are still very reasonable when it comes to handmade products and what I see. So that hasn't been so far a major issue for me.
In addition to what Tanya mentioned, in Iraq, what we have been working with is, first of all, one of the major challenges in Iraq is finding the raw material that qualify to make a good product that you can sell internationally or regionally, or even in the local market. If you wanted to stand out, you need to be like you have to be different. So one of the elements that we really tried to work through is cutting the cost of importing. If there's any need for any raw material, we worked through the supply chain in Iraq, and that kind of really came back with two benefits. First, you're cutting the cost of the raw material, and second, you're improving other actors through the supply chain within Iraq. So you have like a multiple layer of effect on that supply chain. The producers of the raw material, even the vendors could really benefit from that. Even with that, we still figure out that we are not competitive yet against the Chinese and Indian products. Therefore, there is like another element we work on, which is creating community, creating like an identity for the product. And therefore, the Acadian collection, this is the brand we created, is giving the customer, regardless whether internationally or locally, this experience that there is something unique about that product. And honestly, as a business, we try even to integrate customer service into the experience. We try to have like awareness around the I'm not really, I know that there's like a lot of story or a lot of like heritage behind the product but my focus is to make sure that the product has the best quality, because customers will come back if the quality is good, regardless of the story. I think this is where we the largest challenge when it comes to also to cost is shipping cost, and I think everybody agree on that. We are exploring multiple options in terms of air freight or shipping by the sea, and it's still a burden. It's still like an issue when it comes to sales here in the United States. And therefore, I think the volume of the order bring the answer maybe to that issue, but still like it's not yet to the level where you can really have a margin when you sell in the international market.
Thank you. I think both of you mentioned this question of focusing first on the domestic market or the export market, or a combination, because you have a limited budget for marketing and getting to reach your customer. How did you decide? And Hedvig, I'd like to ask you this as well, since you have background in this. Should you focus first on the domestic market and then create demand, create a customer base there, and then grow that demand to the export market, or go directly to the export market? I'm going to start with Hedvig.
It really depends on your products. I mean, if your customers can afford them in the market, in the local market, and there is a local market, for sure, it's a great way to start a business, is to focus on consumers and customers close to you, because of course the best feedback you can get is from your customers for your business, and if they're close to you, then that's exactly what you should do. For many people, that isn't either an option, or for some countries it isn't either as big an option. Either the product, I mean, I understand from Tanya, she has both a local market and international market. I think that's really good. For some products, that may not be as easy, either the price or the design of it doesn't cater to that. So I think it really depends on that.
Tanya, can you talk a bit more about your decision between domestic and export markets?
Well, my objective was to focus entirely on the international market when I wanted to establish Vija, but we got very good market locally in Kabul, and that was because I'm one of the very first companies that are offering online or e-commerce way of shopping in Afghanistan. So for me, the challenge is more about educating my customers also within the country to how to buy a product online, especially with the online payment issue that we have. So my interaction in the first days while I was managing my social media pages myself, it was always about educating them on how to order, go to here, explaining them all the process. And of course, I mean, that is something necessary, but from a business perspective, it also, it takes a lot of time, right? And for a business person, time is money. So we started developing videos that educate our customers and posting it online rather than communicating with each of them individually. And I think with this very surprising interest that there is on social media, just our local market, they just found us on our Instagram pages, and that's how we started getting orders. And to my surprise, we're doing very well with our domestic market. And I had to add an option of cash payment for local purchases in Kabul, and also I offered them free shipping because it's slightly not as expensive as we are shipping internationally. So for me, it was about allocating some marketing budget for the local market and some for the international market. And as Hedvig mentioned, it's also about the type of products, because not all our products sells in the local market because of the prices mainly, because they cannot afford them. So I decided to also introduce some affordable options for our local market, who I knew from the feedback, as Hedvig mentioned, from the feedback I got from my customers locally, that encouraged us to provide more options for them and diversify our products. And that's how we promote our products. For our international markets, we promote the products that we knew that are best fit for our international markets, and we do the same with the local markets. I totally agree with you, Zidan, when you talked about the shipping cost, especially internationally, that's a huge challenge. And one way that I am coping with that is I have stocks in different countries, and that's how I try to reduce the cost for myself. For example, we have our stock in the UK, and we cover the entire UK market and to some extent the European markets from our UK stock, and Canada and the US from US, and of course in Kabul we just have a local stock. So that's kind of my way of reducing to some extent the shipping cost.
Thank you. So a question for each of you. I'd like to have everyone's input on this. Can local producers and artisans go directly to an export market? I think in the development community, we hear a lot of aversion to the concept of middlemen. I've never quite understood what the aversion is. So I'd really like to hear from each of you kind of your thoughts on that. Can these local producers go directly to international customers? Why or why not? And I'll start with Keith.
That's a great question. And I've heard the same, there's this aversion to, and middlemen is kind of like a bad word, among a lot of people. I certainly agree that middlemen who are not value added are, create inefficiencies that hamper growth of export economies. And unfortunately, at least in Afghanistan, there are a lot of middlemen that are offering, services, quote unquote, but they don't add any type of value, and that helps no one, and it just sort of sucks value from the producers ultimately, and I think that it is, however, necessary for value added intermediaries to help prepare a product to meet the export market demand requirements. There's few market-ready products, as I said, in anywhere in the world, and especially in post-conflict countries such as Afghanistan that have been cut off from international markets for decades. There are a few products that are going to be ready to meet international market demand. So someone who can come in and help create, meet those demands and help optimize that product for those markets is certainly value added. There's also a need to address all of the inefficiencies that we spoke about: trade financing, the ability to ship in bulk, and to maintain stock at the end destination. All of those are very helpful for creating export markets. And I think that this sort of aversion to middlemen comes at the expense of growth for these export markets. You need the right sort of middleman, and you need to clearly define the value that they're going to bring to that producer. But for an Afghan producer, for example, to reach export markets, they have to have the expense of shipping, of marketing, of advertising, and that's really not something that they're able or willing to do. And many times, for many suppliers, it might be hard to understand initially. Like, okay, I sell you saffron for whatever, $10, and then you sell it to customers for $30. They don't understand that of that $30, $25 of it goes to shipping, and then the rest of it goes to marketing. And you may or may not be making any profit from it, but that's a growing sort of knowledge that's occurring in Afghanistan, that producers are understanding that to reach international markets it costs money, and so they are willing to work with middlemen who are able to provide value. So that's a positive development that I've seen over the last 5 years.
Hedvig, your thoughts?
I would say the same. I think, it's the same as, I think this is a little bit where I would hope that development agencies could maybe, I think there has been a really big shift in the economy. That there is sort of the new economy, and I think that has been only perpetuated by COVID, as of course we all know and have seen. And it really means that trade and development is done in a different way. And I think there is, exactly as Keith saying, there's this obsession for, if you don't work directly with the artisans, you are not adding any kind of development value. I completely agree that where you measure the impact is, of course, individual people's lives. Did they have a high income? Did they have a better life quality? Could they afford things in terms of health? Of course, absolutely. But I agree that without some of these middlemen, that actually is creating a huge amount of value. And I think you can call them middlemen. You can also call them aggregators, because of course what Rumi does from outside is you're aggregating a huge amount of farmers. You're taking this product, refining it, packaging it, selling it. And so I think maybe we should abandon that term altogether and talk about aggregation, which is really how you scale things. And that's how you get to the value that we are obviously all involved in this because we want to see progress on the individual level and improve people's lives. But to exactly expect individual artisans to be on big international platforms with all the problems we have, it's of course the goal, is very unrealistic. And so I think we have to either we have to do a better job of explaining this better. I mean, investors completely understand this. And this is, of course, why, people often ask us, well, why are you a private company as opposed to a charity? Why don't you raise free money? I mean, I think we can all agree there's no such thing as free money. It comes with a huge amount of reporting and no flexibility between budget lines. And we all know that you start a business and then you pivot a couple of times. Maybe it's big pivots, maybe it's small pivots, but it's probably not going to be exactly the business you had imagined from the start. There are twists and turns along the way. And the nice thing about private capital is that they say, we trust in your plan, we trust in you as entrepreneurs, and if the plan doesn't go well, we know that you can adjust for it. And you have that incredible flexibility, whereas with donor money, and of course checks and balances has to be there when it's public money, but it makes it's a much harder it's much harder to navigate. I think there's not that flexibility and trust in the entrepreneur necessarily. So it was a long
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's maybe a misunderstanding or lack of understanding of the entrepreneur and the business side as well in the development community. Sometimes we've run into that as well.
And the entrepreneur on many levels, because many of the middlemen are also entrepreneurs. It's a network of entrepreneurs. Of course, you can't just extract value without putting any in. But
absolutely. Zidan, any thoughts on middlemen and their value or non-value?
I mean, I was thinking, I think I've been asked even by Iraqi artisans, like, we need to get access to the international market. And I definitely appreciate and admire their enthusiasm. But as Keith mentioned, there is a lot of questions to be answered before even thinking of that. Is your business ready? Do you need to be internationally recognized? Are you already settled as business-wise? Do you have enough income locally to consider internationally? What's gonna add to you? I mean, that's my biggest question to the artisans. And then the middleman in Iraq, I mean, we've been part of initiatives where we had not Iraqis in particular, but we've been in trade shows where we have seen artisans from different countries coming to New York now, Vegas. The idea is for them to be exposed to the international buyers here in the States. The challenge is one-time visit is not an answer to that. It's not going to solve the problem. You need a community, and that interest in buying from the local is not going to come from the middleman. It's going to come from the buyers here in the States or international, and whoever he has or leverage that connection, probably he will be the person who answers the questions to the artisans. And there is no, I didn't see an interest in that, because this is a long-term process. You cannot really do it in 1 or 2 years. Who is going to do it? That's a question.
Thank you, Tanya. Oh, sorry, Hedvig.
No, I wanted to say one thing, and I'm sorry, Tanya, for putting in. But I think also one thing that, to what you were just saying, Zidan, is I think many other sectors comparable to ours, if you look at education or parts of agriculture, I think that's a bit more complicated, and health, have had big international champions. Obviously Bill Gates, health, and there's lots of other examples in other sectors. I don't think that the handmade sector has ever really, and I love this comment from Adriana from Hecho and Nosotros. I mean, what we really need is that kind of collaboration and ecosystem that can really help us lobby more as a consolidated group. And it's sort of been quite a fragmented sector. And so I think that's how we do that together is the challenge, but that I think that could make a very big difference.
Tanya?
Yes, to be honest with the sector, I'll start with the jewelry sector, but then I'll also share my experience from other sectors regarding the middleman. For the gemstone sector, it's actually a need because from the infrastructure point of view, we're not ready yet. Even if we consider the value chain of the sector, from the right from the beginning when the mines or the gemstones are extracted, there is a middleman and providing or supplying those gems to the market, to the local market. There's a lot of middlemen in the between. And also when it comes to further value addition. Either it's cutting the gemstones or making jewelry out of them. Because with the geographic location of the mines that we have, it is not just feasible for one person to go through that and do everything. And that's why I don't even call them middlemen, because to me, it's further value addition. And that is something that I've been appreciating, especially with the supply of gem in those initial stages. And also the way Afghan market, Afghan's handcraft market, the way it is, there's a very large disconnect between the producers and the sellers, let's say, or those who are exporting it. And part of them, again, the infrastructure plays a role. It's also the transportation of the resources to the markets, because again, as I spoke, mines are very much rural located. And again, if we take the example of embroidery sector, it's the same case, because the producers are really located in the most rural villages, and they're doing, but when they get to the international market, firstly, it's very hard to get there. And secondly, if they do get there, then there is always the role of the middleman. Of course, there will be some compromises when it comes to pricing. Some are justifiable, as you mentioned, Keith, because they're doing further value addition in terms of technologically preparing them to the international market. But some are just finding opportunity for just this connection that they're offering from to the very earlier producer in the value chain to the next one. So I think there are opportunities for them and who are benefiting from that. But other than that, I see that as a necessity to be there and serve and do their part in terms of completing the value chain. And also one thing that I totally agree with you is about there is a very limited understanding of what goes beyond the product that you have, especially if you're focusing the international market. It sounds very fancy for the producers to do a business, internationally, but they don't understand what goes through behind that. And there's always been, criticism even on international programs, especially from my experience that I was working with you, say that they're not considering us, they're not taking to the national market. But the question that really should have been asked, are you ready for this? Because it comes with a lot of other requirements. You have to meet the international standards. You have to be able to supply consistently. You have to be able to accept online payments. And these are the things, or are you doing the right way of promotion? Or is really your product an exportable commodity? Because a lot of them, there's a very good market locally and they're just kind of ignoring it. So these are all the questions that I think somehow the middleman does their part in terms of completing the gaps or filling the gaps. But other than that, it's also a big question for the producers itself, because they really need to think very smartly on where would be their target customers.
I think that's a really good point. I think we've all, in our work in the sector, seen local producers that weren't ready for market, expose the international market, and the disappointment or the frustration that followed, or the cost, the money they invested that was kind of lost because they weren't ready. That's a really good point. So we're going to start kind of wrapping up. I have 2 more questions to pose to the group. The first, I'm going to ask everybody what your recommendations for policymakers are. So I'm going to let you know that now so you can think about it for a minute before we get there. But I want to first go to COVID. COVID has affected businesses around the world. I think it's affected this sector, the niche product and handmade product sector, especially for discretionary products that aren't essential. People have less discretionary income to spend in the first place. So has it affected your businesses? If so, how? And if it did, kind of what steps have you taken to try to address that and keep the business alive during that period? Let me start with Zidan.
So which one I should start with? The COVID?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think to our business in general, COVID didn't really bring something new to us. We already have the challenges in place. COVID just added like a layer of like slow purchases and slow orders here in the United States. However, locally, the operations to a certain extent kind of like really continue to be remotely managed. The demand in the local market, I wouldn't say like it decreased, but we experienced like different trends. Like first of all, in Iraq, online or e-commerce really thrived in that period, and we are seeing like a shift in behavior, where people are, I mean, buyers are not necessarily like hesitant from placing an order, going to the Facebook page and asking about the products and placing orders. However, brick and mortars places in Iraq still like the main place where people go to buy. We are trying to make sure that our product are really answering certain needs. So it's not becoming only like a decor, or it's not like a luxurious product, but in a way we're trying to get into like, for example, kitchenware. This is where probably like there will be always a demand for like spoon or wooden spoon or like a cutting plate, or things that like people will need on a daily basis, not necessarily accessories and jewelries and textiles. So and I think that's where we are like heading. We wanted to make sure that the product is answering a need in the country, or for the customers we're working with, where we cannot really lose demand.
Thank you. Keith, on COVID?
So, I think COVID presented a lot of challenges to many, obviously every business, right, was kind of touched in some way by COVID. And I've seen, not just in Afghanistan, but elsewhere, the businesses who were able to pivot have, a lot of them have been able to thrive through this time. For us specifically, what we saw initially as COVID, sort of hit the U.S. and, our entire restaurant channel just went to nothing. So that's a good chunk of our revenue pie, went to zero, and was projected to be zero for the rest of the year. However, on the positive side, the changing consumer trends to shop online really made our e-commerce channel thrive and more than make up for what we lost in our restaurant and food service business. Along with that, we also saw an advantage in that we had sort of what I spoke about as a disadvantage for our business, and the fact of being like completely vertically integrated and having to have capital tied up 6 months in advance of product being received and put on store shelves. We had that flipped into an advantage, because where all our competitors were completely disrupted with supply chain disruptions that occurred across the globe, we have complete control of our supply chain. So we had virtually no disruptions in our supply chain, and we're still able to get product on the shelves. And what that translated to is our expanding presence on store shelves throughout the U.S., because while our competitors were unable to provide the spices that they used to be able to provide, we were happy to expand into their space and able to continue to provide product without disruption. So certainly COVID has been a pretty big disruption, but I think that with any business, being able to sort of think on your feet, pivot, and turn a disadvantage into advantage is key. So we've luckily, unfortunately, been able to come out of COVID strong. And I will mention, in particular with Afghanistan, we give a lot of credit to our suppliers in Afghanistan and our producers and their ability to pivot and sort of meet the demands of the current environment by enacting like different controls, additional controls for their processing to keep all their employees safe and to keep producers safe as they continue to produce in manufacturing settings that we saw in the U.S. was often a center for COVID transmission. We were able to really mitigate that with mask use and continued hand washing. The same kind of mitigation steps that we already had in terms of food safety, we just enhanced those, and it also helped us in terms of preventing COVID transmission in our facilities.
Great. Tanya, Hedvig, any experiences or thoughts on COVID?
Yes. For me, it was a sense of responsibility that I had toward my team, especially the artisans who were in the production line, and with the challenge that there was not strict quarantine by the government. There's no regulations and no policies, and we were kind of had very hard in terms of what to do with the situations that we had, because I was feeling responsible for the safety of my team. But in the meantime, they also needed to work and earn to feed their families. It was kind of like a battle of what is more important. And I had to close my production for 2 months to give us a reflecting time on how to manage and how to what would be the next step. But I didn't lay off my team because I was responsible for their income, and I wanted to make sure they are paid so they could take care of their families, especially with the hard times like that. From the sales point of view, I had the same experience as Keith has. We did not face any problem in terms of the orders or the demand we had, but it was more on the supply side because there was not well-defined quarantine regulations. And so what I did in this 2 months of reflecting time, that I decided to equip them, the artisans, so they could start working from home. And it was, they were provided the resources, they were provided the machineries and what they were supposed to do, and they started working from home, which was a very good model for us to cope with the pandemic. And so, and later on, when the government sort of defined their policies and things got better, but I did had that 2 months of, shutting down the production. And thankfully, we had enough stock that it didn't interrupt the online sales, but from the supply side, that was our experience.
Hedvig?
Yeah, I think, we are not selling it. We focused on we haven't really been moving products yet in this new business, but we've been focusing on our trade financing and our digitalization. We've developed these software tools that helps manage production in the handmade space. We found that you can be manual, but you don't have to be analog, and there could be much more digitalization in the space. So what we've seen is just that people are trying to become much more digital, which is essentially good for us and for everybody else. But I still think one of the challenges, and maybe we can get into that with the policymakers, is how do you really help people get more digital faster? Because I think that's going to be a massive gap, and we've in certain societies moved so fast forward in digitalization, many people say as much as 10 years, but that's not the case in a lot of other places. And if you don't want to leave people behind, that's one thing that has to be really thought a lot about, I think.
Excellent point. Okay, final question, and then we'll start to wrap up the session. What recommendations do we have for policymakers and development professionals seeking to scale up or create more jobs through these niche and handmade spaces? I want to start with Tanya, because you've actually been on both sides of this. You were on the policy side with USAID, and now you're in the private sector and a business founder. What are your thoughts and recommendations for that audience?
Thank you very much. To start with the gem sector, there's a lot of complications and a lot of restrictions legally, and policymakers do have an important role to play because initially for 5 years, there was a ban on export of gemstones in the country, and that didn't, the incentive behind that was, kind of encouraging the value addition within the country. But with the lack of skills that we had, it just encouraged the illegal way of trading the gemstones. And it was a lost opportunity and lost taxes for the government. But even before that, there's a huge amount of royalty rates and custom rates on trading the gemstones. It is altogether with the tariff and royalty, it's 27%, while regionally it's only 4%. So that's in no way the private sector, it's not encouraging them at all. And they find it very easier to use a shipping company to just, without notifying the government or doing all the legal way of, so I believe that government does have an important role in terms of encouraging and making the policies that encourage not only private sector, but also international investors, because we have more than 130 type of minerals in the country, and that's an untapped resource, untapped opportunity. If we have the right policies and the right security, investment security in the country, I think we can do much more, contribute in the economy of the country. And also, recently, what I appreciate the government has been focusing is the sector as a potential commodity to export. The national export strategy of Afghanistan is developed now, and one of the main commodities is the gemstone sector. And in fact, it has been searched that investing in gemstone sector creates another 5 jobs to work around the value chain and infrastructure of these sectors. So that's clearly an incentive. And what we need to do is to provide the right infrastructure in terms of, activating the shipping companies or supporting investing in these sectors, the financial infrastructure in terms of online payment. These are the really serious and very immediate needs of the businesses to encourage the commodity or export in general.
Thank you. Zidan, recommendations for policymakers.
Of course, I think in Iraq at least, I think setting the right expectations is one of the critical issues I kind of like notice when it comes to funding programs that are intended to create jobs through improving private sector. I think there should be an understanding that improving one sector is not the answer to improve the business or like increasing jobs in general. Working on the artisan sector is one element, and even that sector on its own is not going to be able to bring a lot of jobs in light of the circumstances of like market and demand. And even in Iraq, when it comes to policies and registrations and finance, there's a lot of reforms, a lot of work that should be done on that area. Unless you have access to finance, unless you have more simplistic procedures to register as a business, more exemptions for those startups, those are the people we work with. We can't do everything to them, and before we hit like a wall where we have no control over policies, over import and export policies, taxations. There is a lot to be kind of like really looked at before setting the expectation of like 1 or 2 years of programs will be making like a long-term or sustainable impact.
Thank you. Keith.
I have so many recommendations, but I think I can summarize them, briefly. I think first and foremost, trust the private sector and the free market to generate and provide solutions. Secondly, I think focus on setting the conditions for creating value-added activity in country. And thirdly, and sort of as a corollary to number 2, is focus on infrastructure. I think that some of the best things that have come out of, both international and domestic investment in the private sector is sort of this investment in like funds that go and invest in companies that are able to do work. So, you have funds that are able to sort of help develop those entrepreneurs, both in country and, export to continue to grow and then provide the capital that's necessary to do so. As Hedvig said, without sort of these, line item budget restrictions, you trust the entrepreneurs to make the right decisions and to, to pivot and create that business. Second, focusing on value-added activity. You initially, as Ms. Arya said, it's important to, take the opportunities that present themselves. So if that's just a pure wholesale opportunity for your producers, that's something that you don't want to miss. But then, along with that, I think the government, governments have a large role to play to ensuring that more value-added activity is able to be done in country. So whether that's investment in, capital equipment, investment in skills training, all that needs to be done to make sure that, that product is not just being extracted as a raw product and going and being, worked on, in neighboring countries or elsewhere and ended up as a finished product on the U.S. or other places. It's better for everybody involved if that value-added activity occurs in country. And then lastly, a focus on infrastructure. With respect to Afghanistan, I think one of the best things that have been done recently is creating subsidized air routes out of Afghanistan to places like Turkey and India. And this pays for itself in the creation of business activity for really modest investments on behalf of the government to help exporters reach these international markets. So not only does that add speed and for a landlocked country, for Afghanistan, very important to add speed in the export process, but it sort of allows for much more product to be moved out of the country than, through traditional like trucking routes, and eliminate some of that risk that may be preventing, commodities from being exported currently.
Excellent points. Thanks, Keith. Hedvig.
Yeah, I would echo what has been said by everybody else, but I think it's really, there's sort of three areas, and some are maybe a little bit overlapping. I think digitalization is really important because it creates efficiencies, but also it really helps on communications and connecting to more global markets, if that's the aim of a business, but even inside a country, between regions. And I think financing is a big one as well. We've talked about that for many years, but both the trade financing that Keith also brought up, which is what our platform is providing as part of the services, and also the payments systems. How can policymakers support initiatives that are really very focused on this on an enterprise level, not just on an individual level? That's a very important distinction that I'm not sure always is being made. And then I think this sort of investing in businesses or organizations that really focuses on aggregating services, because that's what's so expensive for our and so many other sectors, that everybody is trying to do the same. If you can aggregate certain services, I mean, everybody has talked about logistics today, and payments. If you can really focusing on getting some good deals and some aggregation in the sector, then that's a very big value to everybody in the sector. So I think, again, it's really, I would say, for policymakers to really update their thinking and look at the new economy, and it's not the same development challenge. Well, the challenges of getting people out of poverty is the same as 10 years ago, but the way to do it, I think, is very different. And I was talking to my husband about it yesterday, and I think when I left Afghanistan 11 years ago, I think I was even very involved in policy development, but I still definitely thought that development was really mostly done by development agencies and philanthropes and NGOs. I think today a lot of development is done by the private sector, and I think that the public sector is really trying to collaborate, but there is still not a complete comfort on the public sector's part in dealing with the private sector. And I don't know what we can do to overcome that, because I think, of course, a business is only worth supporting or collaborating with from a public perspective if you are a responsible business. But I think there is a lot of responsible business out there, businesses who are really trying to become responsible. So I don't know how we can make that public-private connection stronger, because I think you really can get so much out of that. There's so much matching funding and co-investment that can be done that can really accelerate things. And I think that's absolutely key. I mean, I think the public sector is extremely important on so many levels. And I think what we have seen in the last couple of years is that we can raise capital for the sector, private capital. That was so hard even 5 years ago. That has really changed. That's positive, right?
That's excellent points. Development is being done by the private sector. And I think one of the biggest lessons or observations I've made during my time working in this space is that profit is the only sustainability. And until the public sector development professionals can really understand more about how the private sector operates, how the private sector is segmented, the value add the private sector brings, it's not that profit in and of itself is bad, it's how you use that profit. And when you're reinvesting it, like all four of you are, into businesses that are for-profit businesses, but that deliver value to the producers and improve their lives, that's the ultimate goal of the economic growth space, in my opinion. Well, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure hosting you and reconnecting with everyone. Thank you so much to our audience and the questions that you've posted in the chat box. I think we've addressed almost all of them. This recording will be available on our website sometime tomorrow. And if you missed anything or would like to review it, it will be there along with a summary of the comments. So thank you all again. It was a pleasure, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.